Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a really fascinating book today, Stephen King's Misery.
Oh, Misery, a classic.
It really is. Published back in '87.
87, huh?
Yep. And, it's interesting because King was going through a lot back then, battling addiction, uh, wrestling with his own success, all that.
It's almost like you can feel that darkness kind of seep into the story.
Totally. It makes Misery so much more, intense, psychologically driven,
Yeah.
not just your typical horror story.
No, not at all. It really gets under your skin. And it makes you think about, like, the whole author-reader thing, the power dynamics, that fine line between, loving a book and being, well, obsessed.
Right. Yeah, and we're going to get into all this. But first, for anyone who hasn't read it, and spoiler alert if you haven't, can you give us a quick rundown of the plot?
Sure. So the main character is Paul Sheldon, this famous author.
Famous for?
He writes this historical romance series
Mm-hmm.
about a character named Misery Chastain.
Oh, so not the kind of Stephen King we usually think of.
Yeah, totally different. But that's part of what makes this book so interesting. You see Paul kind of struggling with, like, wanting to break free from this misery character, but also being afraid of what his readers will think.
Especially one reader in particular.
Exactly. Annie Wilkes, the infamous #1 fan.
Every author's nightmare.
Pretty much. So the story starts with Paul getting into this car accident, bad one, during a blizzard, of course.
Classic King.
Right. And he's badly hurt, stranded. That's when Annie finds him.
Seems like a stroke of luck at first.
You'd think so. Injured author, isolated farmhouse, snowstorm raging outside. And Annie, she's a former nurse, so she seems like the perfect person to help.
Cozy bed, painkillers. She's even read all his books.
Yeah. But as you might guess, things don't stay cozy for long.
Because it turns out Annie is not just a fan, she's obsessed.
Obsessed is an understatement. And Paul, he's not a guest anymore. He's a prisoner.
Trapped.
Yeah.
Both physically, because of his injuries, and creatively, because of Annie.
Totally. And that's what King does so well, this whole idea of double captivity.
Okay, so let's talk about Paul for a second. He's not your typical hero, is he?
Not really. He's got his demons, addiction, self-doubt.
And he's almost haunted by his own creation, Misery Chastain.
Right. He's successful, but not really happy. He wants to move on from the misery books, but he's terrified of losing his fans.
It's like he built his own literary cage. Now he's stuck.
And Annie is the warden, I guess you could say, forcing him to write a new misery book.
It's horrifying. And speaking of horrifying, can we talk about Annie?
Oh boy, Annie Wilkes.
I mean, just thinking of that phrase she uses, cock-a-doodle car, gives me chills.
It's that creepy sweetness, right? Like one minute she's bringing him soup and tucking him in, the next minute she's...
Well, let's just say she's not afraid to get violent.
Not at all, and that's what makes her so scary. She's so unpredictable.
Oh, and the scrapbook.
Don't even get me started on the scrapbook.
But like King is slowly peeling back the layers of her madness.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Through those newspaper clippings, you start to see her past. The violence. The obsession with control. It's like a window into a very dark and twisted mind.
It makes you realize that the most frightening monsters,
They aren't always hiding under the bed.
sometimes they're right there, in plain sight, disguised as our biggest fans.
And that, my friend, is the brilliance of Stephen King. He takes this, like, totally normal thing, a fan rescuing her favorite author, and just twists it into this nightmare. Makes you think twice about, fandom and obsession.
Yeah, and it's not just that she's obsessed. It's like she actually thinks she's doing the right thing. Like
Yeah.
she's saving Paul, protecting him.
She's totally delusional.
Right.
She thinks she's the only one who really understands him, that his real fans, they'll use him up.
It's messed up. Her whole world revolves around Misery Chastain and Paul, because he created her. He's part of that world too.
And anything that threatens that world, well.
Yeah, that doesn't end well. Speaking of things that don't end well, we have to talk about the hobbling scene.
Oh, man.
I still can't believe King went there. It's so brutal.
It's definitely one of the most memorable moments in the book.
To put it mildly.
But it's not just about the shock value. It's about control. Annie needs to control Paul, not just keep him prisoner.
She needs to break him.
Yeah. Physically, mentally, creatively. But, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. Isn't it kind of like what Paul's going through anyway?
How do you mean?
Well, he's addicted to the painkillers, right? He's trapped by his own success. He wants to get away from misery, maybe the hobbling, in a twisted way. It's like
a messed up version of what he wants.
yeah, like he needs to be broken down to break free.
Whoa. Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about Paul's writing, too. I mean, he's literally writing for his life.
King does this amazing thing where he shows how Paul uses his writing not just to survive, but to fight back
He's manipulating Annie with his words, subtly rebelling.
and planning his escape. Like when he tricks her into letting him out of the room by saying he needs more paper.
That was so clever.
It is. He knows it's risky, but he has to take that chance. To think, to move, to feel like he has some control.
It makes me wonder if King is, drawing on his own experiences here as a writer. The pressure to create, the expectations.
Oh, totally. I mean, King's talked about how hard it is to write under pressure and that fear of disappointing your fans, you know? Like you have to push yourself creatively, but also stay true to your voice.
Wow. Yeah, I can definitely see that in Paul's story.
Yeah.
But it's not just the creative pressure, it's the psychological trauma that Annie inflicts on him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the physical stuff is bad enough, but it's the mental and emotional abuse that really gets to you. She isolates him, controls every little thing, what he eats, when he sleeps. She even tries to, like, warp his sense of reality.
And it's so calculated, that creepy calmness, and then bam,
Yeah.
she explodes. You're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop.
It's that tension, that claustrophobia. You're right there in Paul's head. You feel his fear, his desperation.
And you know what really gets me? This book came out in the 80s, but it feels so relevant today.
Right. I mean, fan obsession, people feeling entitled to control how a story goes, harassing creators online, blurring those lines between fiction and reality.
It's everywhere. And misery is like this warning sign. Like, hey, this seemingly harmless admiration, it can turn dark real fast.
It reminds us that even if you love something, a book, a movie, whatever, you gotta respect the people who made it. They're human beings with their own lives and ideas. You can't control that.
And for creators, it's like a glimpse into the potential downsides of fame.
Yeah.
That pressure could be intense.
Yeah. It makes you think.
It really does make you think about that whole balance between loving something and, well, taking it too far.
For sure. And, we can't talk about Misery without talking about the movie.
Oh, yeah. With Kathy Bates.
Yes. I mean, talk about a performance.
Shelling. Absolutely shelling.
She just nailed that whole creepy sweetness of Annie Wilkes.
And then those outbursts.
She totally deserved that Oscar.
No kidding. She brought Annie to life in a way that honestly scared me more than the book.
Totally get that. And thanks to that movie, Misery just became this pop culture phenomenon.
It's crazy, right? A book from the 80s, still so powerful today.
It's King, though. He just has this way of getting under your skin, exploring those dark corners of, human nature, the things we don't like to talk about.
Obsession, control, violence, they can pop up anywhere, with anyone.
Exactly. And he doesn't sugarcoat it. He makes you feel it. The fear, the desperation, like you're right there with Paul, trapped in that room with Annie.
You're not just reading it, you're living it.
Totally. And I think that's why, even after all these years, people are still drawn to Misery. It's more than just a thriller. It's a psychological study, a cautionary tale, a look into the dark side of, well, ourselves, I guess.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive here, I want to leave everyone with a few things to think about. What was it about Annie Wilkes that really got to you? Did this book change the way you think about, like, fandoms and the relationship between creators and their audience?
And is this kind of obsession, this need for control, is it more common today than it was back then, in the age of social media? Something to ponder.
It definitely is. King, he might have written this back in the 80s, but, man, he tapped into something timeless, something that honestly kind of scares me. Makes you look twice at the people around you.
And maybe think twice about how much we let those fictional worlds, those characters, how much we let them into our real lives.
Truth. Well, folks, that's our deep dive on Misery. Until next time, happy reading, and try not to let those #1 fan vibes get too intense.